Page 69. But he did not clearly discern the date which prophetic time period it began or when it would end. He did, however, connect these 7 times with the Gentile times of Luke 21:24. So the 7 times, the Gentile times, there's no biblical connection between the two. There is no place in the Bible that talks about 7 Gentile times. There are things in the Bible talking about 7 times, things in the Bible talking about the Gentile times. There is nothing talking about the 7 Gentile times. He just pulled it out of his ass. Quite to the contrary, as shown in the chapter above, Brown expressly stated his firm conviction that the 2,520-year period began in 604 BCE and would end in 1917. Further, despite the Society's italicized statement, Brown did not connect. We're talking about other people who... notice both books are talking about the Proclaimer's book and shooting down shit in the Proclaimer's book. Now we're talking about how the Proclaimer's book made it sound like there's other people. They admitted that Russell got his 1914 crap from Barber, or that Barber was the first person to come up with that calculation in 1914. They admitted that, and then they started talking about all these other expositors who also use all the same gimmicks. The 2,520 years, starting from a date, calculating the end times, yada yada yada. Made it sound like everybody supported Russell's calculation when none of them did. The little pieces are shared because everybody was using those little pieces. All the crazy asses that were doing the same kind of bullshit. Proclaimer's book is very misleading about that. Brown did not connect the 2,520 years with the Gentile times of Luke 21:24 because, as he pointed out in the chapter above, he held the Gentile times referred to in this text to be 1,260 years, not 7 times of 2,520 years. See footnote 20 above. Both statements about Brown's calculation, then, are demonstrably false. So they lied in the Proclaimer's book. It's a theme that both these books go into. In addition to John A. Brown, the Society in the same paragraph refers to Edward B. Elliot and Robert Seeley, both of whom mentioned 1914 as one of the possible dates for the end of the 7 times. Both of them, however, actually preferred 1793, later changed to 1791 by Elliot as the terminal date. So even the people that stated 1914 had other dates too. Finally, an unnamed publication edited by Joseph Cease and others is stated to have set out calculations that pointed to 1914 as a significant date, even though the reasoning contained was based on chronology that C.T. Russell later rejected. Same date, different reason was another case. The fact is, however, that this holds true of all 4 expositors mentioned in this by the Society. All of them used a chronology that dated the desolation of Jerusalem to 588 or 587, not 606, as in Russell's writings. So other people had it right, as far as the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians. Brown arrived at 1917 as the terminal date only because he reckoned the 2,520 years from the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, 604 BCE. Instead of his 18th year, as did Barber and Russell. So Barber and Russell were claiming that the 18th year is the year that Nebuchadnezzar desolated Jerusalem, and then they were just wrong about when his 18th year was. The other 3 arrived at 1914 by counting from Nebuchadnezzar's accession year. So like if the Watchtower, if Barber and Russell just stated that they were counting from his accession year, then their date would be right. Well, when I say right, I mean at least not clearly wrong in terms of being factually incorrect. Accession year, which he dated at 606 BC instead of 605 BC, the date established by modern historians. Alright, so they would have been 2 years off. So the correct historical date is 605 BCE for the accession year of Nebuchadnezzar. 2 years ain't so bad. 20 years, that's pretty bad. Although all of them based calculations on chronologies that were rejected by Russell and his followers, the Society claims that these expositors could see that 1914 was clearly marked by Bible prophecy. So they're claiming, everybody could see that 1914 was clearly marked by Bible prophecy. How could they see this clearly by using chronologies the Society still holds to be false is certainly puzzling. Because when you have a crazy-ass cult, where what's true doesn't matter, it's not really that important to be correct about stuff. They know that anybody that makes a big deal about this can get killed off anyway, so what the hell do they care? It's good. Hell, it's a good heretic trap. Get some crazy bastards that want to like quibble about what's true or not. You need to get rid of them anyways, right? That's a good heretic trap. This practice makes it virtually impossible for the great majority of readers to discover the subtle methods used to support indefensible interpretations and cover up over embarrassing evidence. Just as mentioned, the Society, contrary to earlier claims, concedes in the new book that the predictions attached to 1914 failed. As was shown in the chapter above, very specific and distinct predictions about 1914 were summarized in 7 points on pages 76 to 78 of Volume 2 of Millennial Dawn, originally published in 1889. These predictions were there put forward with no uncertain terms. The discussion is teeming with words and phrases such as facts, proof, Bible evidence, and established truth. That 1914 would see the disintegration of the rule of imperfect men. For instance, it is stated to be a fact firmly established by the Scriptures. And some crack. What does the Society's new history book do with the pretentious claims and very positive language that originally encapsulated these predictions? They are totally smoothed over and concealed, referring to the above-mentioned discussion of the Gentiles' times in Volume 2 of Millennial Dawn, but without quoting any of the actual statements made, the Society asks, but what would the end of the Gentile times mean? The surprising answer given is that the Bible students were not completely sure what would happen. Although some of the predictions were briefly mentioned, the Society carefully avoids terming them predictions or prophecies. Russell and his associates never predicted or foretold anything. They never claimed to present proof, established truth. They just thought, suggested, expected, earnestly hoped that this or that might happen, but that they were not completely sure. Thus, the predictions are wrapped in language that completely masks the true nature of the aggressive doomsday message proclaimed to the world by the International Bible Students for over a quarter century before 1914. Disguising the presumptuous predictions in such vague and unassuming words and phrases, of course, makes it easier to humbly concede that these failed. Chapter 2. Biblical and Secular Chronology. In defending the date of 607 BCE as the time of the desolation of Jerusalem and the starting point of calculating the length of the Gentile times, representatives of the Watchtower Society claim they are relying on the Bible. Those who date the desolation of 587 or 586 are said to rely on secular sources rather than the Bible. The anonymous author of the appendix to chapter 14 of the book Let Your Kingdom Come, for instance, states, "We are willing to be guided primarily by God's Word rather than by a chronology that is based principally on secular evidence or that disagrees with the Scriptures." Such statements are obviously intended to create impression that those who reject 607 BCE as the date for the desolation of Jerusalem have no real faith in the Bible. Why won't you believe the Bible? But do such statements give a fair description of the matter, or are they just sanctimonious disparagement aimed at defaming the Christian character of those who disagree not with the Scriptures, but with the Watchtower Society's datings? Or may it even be the defenders of society's chronology have themselves not really understood the true nature of Bible chronology? The nature of Bible chronology! The 607 BCE for the fall of Jerusalem to Babylon is not from the Bible. Today people read or use the terms BC or AD corresponding to BCE or CE and generally give no thought to the origin of those designations. Actually, the Christian era in which the events dated in relation to the year of birth of Christ is a rather late construction. As is well established, the system was not introduced until the 6th century CE by the Roman monk and scholar Dionysius Exiguus. Another 500 years would pass, however, before the new era had been generally accepted as a dating system in the Catholic world. Since the Bible was written long before the time of Dionysius or Exiguus, it does not, of course, give any dates according to our Christian era. Thus, although the Watchtower Society dates the baptism of Jesus to 29 CE, the 20th year of Artaxerxes I to 455 BCE, and the fall of Babylon to 539 BCE, and the desolation of Jerusalem to 607 BCE, none of these dates are found in the Bible! The Bible gives relative datings only. What does that imply? Consider this relevant example in 2 Kings 25:2. The desolation of Jerusalem is dated to the 11th year of King Zedekiah, the last king of Judah. Verse 8 additionally tells us that this occurred in the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. But when was that? How far from our own time was it? How many years before the Christian era did it happen? The fact is that the Bible gives no information whatsoever that of itself links up these datings with our Christian era. Similarly, the books of King and Chronicles tell us about the kings who ruled in Israel and Judah from Saul, the first king, onto Zedekiah, the last one. We were told who succeeded whom and for how many years each of them ruled. By summing up the length of reign from Saul to Zedekiah, we can measure the approximate space of time. There are many uncertain points between the two kings. In this way, we find the period of the Hebrew monarchies covered roughly 500 years. But still, we have not found no answer to the question, at what point on the stream of time did this period start and what point did it end? If the Bible had gone on to give a continuous and unbroken series of regnal years from Zedekiah all the way down to the beginning of the Christian era, the question would have been answered. But Zedekiah was the last king of the Jewish line of kings, and his reign ended centuries before Christ's coming. Nor does the Bible give any other information that directly identifies for us the length of the period from Zedekiah's 11th year, when Jerusalem was desolated, to the beginning of the Christian era. Thus we have a period of roughly 500 years, the period of Hebrew monarchies, but we are not told how far from our time this period was and how it can be fixed to our Christian era. If the Bible had preserved dated and detailed descriptions of astronomical events, such as solar and lunar eclipses, or the positions of the planets in relation to different stars and constellations, this would have made our problem easier. Modern astronomers, with their knowledge of the regular movements of the moon and the planets, are able to calculate the positions of these heavenly bodies held in the starry sky thousands of years ago. But the fact is that the Bible provides no information of this kind. The Bible itself, then, does not show how its chronological datings may be connected to our own era. A chronology that is, in a sense, hanging in the air is simply a type of chronology called a relative chronology. Only if the biblical information supplied us with the exact distance from the time of Zedekiah up to our own era, either by the aid of complete or coherent lengths of reign, or by detailed and dated astronomical observations, we would have an absolute chronology, that is, a chronology that gives us the exact distance from the last year of Zedekiah to our own time. It seems evident the Bible writers themselves were not concerned about supplying this, their focus simply being on other matters. What source, then, can we look to make a connection to with our era reckoning? So, none of this has anything to do with what's in the Bible. There isn't any reason to think that, the whole thing is bullshit, but even there, this idea that the 607 date comes from the Bible is complete horseshit. It has to be connected to our own era somehow, and the only way to do that is through some secular source. Meaning, you can't do that with the Bible. Despite the relative nature of biblical dates, it is nonetheless not impossible to date events mentioned in the Bible. If they were able to synchronize the chronology of the Bible with the chronology of another country, those whose chronology in turn can be fixed to our Christian era, then it would be possible to convert the Bible's relative chronology to an absolute chronology. This means, however, that we would have to rely on extra-biblical, that is, on secular historical sources in order to date events in the Bible. So nobody can figure out the actual date on our timeline using the Bible. So Russell didn't, Barber didn't. We have no other alternative. If we want to know when, in relation to our own time, an event mentioned in the Bible took place, be it the date for the fall of Babylon, the date for the desolation of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the date for rebuilding of the temple in the reign of Darius I, or any other date whatever, then we're obliged to turn to secular historical sources. This is the sober fact every Bible believer has to accept, whether he likes it or dislikes it or not. The simple truth is that, as relates to connecting with our own Christian era reckoning, without secular sources there is no Bible chronology, no datings of biblical events in terms of BCE or CE. This means, of course, that to speak of using the chronology of the Bible is unilateral, independent time measure by which the correctness of a certain date can be established is simply to ignore reality. When, for instance, some witnesses point to the fact that modern historians date the fall of Babylon to 539 BCE, and then claim that the chronology of the Bible is in agreement with this date, they show that they have not really understood what the relative nature of the Bible chronology actually implies. Where does the Bible assign a date for the fall of Babylon? A witness might refer to Jeremiah's prophecy of the 70 years leading up to Babylon's fall. But on what date did those 70 years begin? So as to count forward to the end, there is none supplied. Since the Bible does not give any date at all, not even the specific relative date for the fall of Babylon, the statement that the Bible agrees with the secular dating of this event in 539 BCE is completely meaningless. Alright, page 75.